on, Wolfpack Nation? Thank you so much for joining back in here for another exciting episode. This is one that, again, I think is a reunion that could not have come at the more perfect time for sure. And bringing on the man that needs no introduction to any State fan, and Joe Giglio. So, Joe, thanks so much for joining us today, my friend.
Absolutely, anytime, guys.
Yeah. Again, I think, and just for those NC State fans that do not know or do not remember, about a year ago, we actually had Joe, back when it was just Maka and I, on a live stream to talk about the ACC conference expansion when Texas and Oklahoma announced they were going to the SEC. And just a little bit of background. Again, literally, we scheduled this interview about a week or two ago. So before all this stuff happened with USC and UCLA and all that, and then, of course, right when we schedule it, all this stuff happened. So, again, we were just joking offline saying it must have been just because we scheduled Joe that some other conference expansion stuff had to happen. But we'll definitely get to that. But first of all, Joe, I mean, guys started off here is that, I mean, I know that a lot of people, see you, with your man Joe Ovies and all that. And obviously, talking about, the big game boomer and, laughing at State being, a tier 1 school and all that jazz. But just to remind all State fans out there is that you did go to NC State. So I know inside you still got the NC State in you for sure. So, first of all, I mean, one of the things that stood out to me is I saw WRL put together like a biography about you. I saw you had a bachelor's in history. So I got to ask you, so history, why history?
Well, I've always been fascinated by history, but also my skills, I've always been able to write. And that was always kind of a natural topic for me.
Yeah.
And you're supposed to write what you know. So that's how I ended up in sports anyway.
Do you have a particular thing about history? Is it like sports history? Is it American history? Because I mean, it just said history, right? So
yeah,
it's pretty
American history was
Gotcha.
Most of the classes I took. When you still have to take ancient Rome and some others, but it was mostly John David Smith was there when I was in school, and he was a renowned Civil War historian too. So it was great. I had a couple classes with him, and Dr. Hobbs was great. So a lot of great classes that I took there.
Do you still visit NC State's campus often, or? Yeah.
I mean, anytime I go over to basketball, to the Dale Center, I'll stop in, and usually over at Tally or somewhere around there. I mean, the campus has changed so much; it's kind of crazy. But I like to get over there and just see everything.
Absolutely, Greg. Sorry,
no, you're good. So you're originally from New Jersey. Why North Carolina? Why NC State? That's usually not something It's you always say you're born into NC State, so obviously you weren't born into it. So how do you get there?
I had my dad had friends in Cary, and my senior year in high school in New Jersey, we had more snow than Nome, Alaska. And the summer before, I had decided, well, maybe I'll go to Maryland, maybe I'll go to NC State, maybe I'll go to Georgia. We drove down to Georgia, and we stopped here on the way down, and his friends, Denny and Maureen White, were just so awesome. And my first week of senior year of high school, I got accepted into NC State. So
sweet.
I had very little interest in doing a whole lot of work before then. So let me figure out how to mute myself, because my dogs are about to go crazy here. But I got it here just in case they start going crazy.
No worries. Yeah, no. And again, just it's kind of one of those things. I remember, I think it was back in like 2017 or something like that, back when you were at the News and Observer, and you would announce that you were switching over, and then somebody else from News and Observer was coming in to cover NC State. All NC State fans just like raised heck, like, no, we want Joe. And then, of course, Lily lasted 1 year, and then you came back. So we were like, oh, finally, everything's back to neutral. But, I think starting off this episode, at least coming into this, we had the plan that we were going to talk football and basketball, not jazz first. But I think that now that we've kind of already talked about all the craziness with conference expansion, we're just going to go ahead and just knock into that first, because I know that all our viewers here are just absolutely just scratching their heads, wondering what the heck is going on. And I mean, because I'll say first of all for myself that I've literally messaged the group probably once a day saying, I can't believe this is where we are in college football. I can't believe that we literally are in a world now where Texas and Oklahoma is going to be joining the SEC, and USC and UCLA is going to be joining, not going to be in the Pac-12 anymore. Like it's craziness. I mean, does that kind of thought hit you at all? Or is it just kind of like, with NIL, it's just kind of the way and the tide right now, really?
Hang on, listen, 1 second. Let me go tell my people what's going on in here, okay?
You're good. Go ahead. Go ahead, Joe. You're good. All right, so we're at a little less than 6 minutes. So
you just re-ask the question, okay. You'll be fine.
It's kind of a perfect cut point, exactly like you're saying, right? Yeah. And it kind of and now we can kind of think about it a second.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, I can answer your question now.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's unbelievable to think that Texas and Oklahoma will be in the SEC. It's even more ridiculous that USC and UCLA will be in the Big Ten.
Right.
It's basically the world now is the Fox Network Conference, which would be the Big Ten, and then the ESPN Network Conference, which is the SEC.
I literally was just saying that before you came on, Joe.
Yeah, I mean that's all it really is. Why some of these moves aren't made just for football, I don't know. Why they want to do this to the volleyball teams, the soccer teams, and all the other non-revenue sports that they have, that's ridiculous. They're not really listening to the athletes, if you're asking me, on that front. And that's what the money's for, I guess. But I don't know. It's really hard to try to wrap your arms around what they're going to do to college sports, and that's part of progress, I guess. We all kind of hate it. We hated it in really 2004 when they added Miami and Virginia Tech, and the wave in 2013 was, you just kind of shook your head and go, oh, okay, they're going to double their media rights revenue, cool. And now you're going, well, what can they do to actually survive? I mean, that's the crazy part of all this for the ACC is you would have figured, well, surely the ACC will always find a way. But now I do think that's legitimately in question.
Okay, well, because obviously I think that, when we had this conversation last year, Joe, one of the comments I still even remember to this day without even looking it up was basically you basically made a statement saying that the ACC can't just add somebody just to add somebody. Like they have to add somebody that actually will make them more profitable than necessarily just because I remember you actually kind of went into you actually created an article or something like that, basically explaining that if you add another team, you basically have to split basically split the pie into another piece, basically. Yeah. And so if you don't have somebody that can bring in more money than that pie piece breakup, then it's not really worth the time. And so, obviously in terms of ACC wise, it's a no brainer that obviously the ACC, if for somehow, some way they can get Notre Dame, then sure, that's easy, no questions asked. We'll love it. Now, do I think that's a tough one? Absolutely. I think that is a huge uphill battle. But even from, the other side in terms of, people saying, what about Houston, Cincinnati, West Virginia is a name I think is coming up a lot again. That came up again last year as well. I mean, does your stance kind of change at all from a year ago when there was talks of West Virginia joining the ACC as well?
Well, Houston and Central Florida are non-starters. Arizona State.
Don't move the needle.
They don't help the league. They don't help the league. West Virginia, I argued in 2003 they should have added West Virginia. I think West Virginia is different. I think one thing you got to understand now that is different is without divisions, you don't have to add an even number of teams. That's important. That's an important shift in how the thinking goes. I also think that's the shift for the SEC and the Big Ten as well. I mean, once you just throw everyone in a pot and have rotating schedules, then you can have 17, 19, 21, you name it. So I think that's actually kind of important. It's been overlooked. Every report I've seen has been, they're going to add 6 teams, or they'll go to 20, or they'll go to 24. That's old thinking. It's not new thinking. The thing about Notre Dame that's interesting is they're just never going to give up who they are. And being an independent is who they are. Now, getting 5 games out of Notre Dame on an annual basis was actually a win for John Swofford. Getting them to sign the grant of rights was also a win for John Swofford. So that ties Notre Dame to the ACC until 2036. And now I believe Notre Dame will be the school that tries to challenge the grant of rights. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
But I don't think Notre Dame is in a big hurry to join the Big Ten. They never were before. And part of that is NBC. And if you think about it, Fox, Notre Dame, they're not in a big hurry to go do something with Fox either.
No.
So it's kind of in the ACC's favor, kind of. But again, if Notre Dame is the school that goes and challenges the grant of rights and gets out of it, well, then everyone else will figure out how to get out of it as well. So a little bit of a double-edged sword there.
So, sorry. I was going to say, one of the things I read, and there's so much, that's the fun part, right? There's so much floating out there. There's everyone's a armchair quarterback, lawyer, commissioner, all that. But one of the things that I read about Notre Dame is that the SEC kind of protects them with a seat to the table for the football playoff. So that because of the way they voted last year, that it was almost like a thumbs up for Notre Dame to stay in the conversation and relevant as an independent. Do you know much about that and why the SEC would necessarily protect Notre Dame like that?
Well, I don't think the SEC was protecting Notre Dame. Jack Swarbrick was on the subcommittee, the Notre Dame athletic director. So the playoff expansion subcommittee was the SEC commissioner, Greg Sankey. It was the guy from the Mountain West, who obviously is going to be pro any expanded format. But Bowlesby from the Big 12, who was asleep at the wheel, and Notre Dame, Jack Swarbrick. So expanding to 12 at the time, you're sitting there going, why would they expand to 12? And then you think about it. Well, Notre Dame would get in every year that they didn't have 3 losses or more. The SEC would get all the teams they wanted in, including being able to tell Oklahoma and Texas that they could get in. On the surface, I don't necessarily have a problem with Jim Phillips, the ACC commissioner, saying, hey, we're against this because you're trying to pull a fast one on us on the surface. But I think ultimately that was his blunder because he tried to make a deal with the Big Ten. Big Ten didn't care about that deal. And that's where we are now.
Yeah.
By adding USC, UCLA, they're going to kill the Pac-12, and that's fine. I'm not going to weep for the Pac-12. USC and UCLA did that, not anyone else. But I will say, again, all of this is really for football. Why they can't just do this for football, I don't know. Because this could end up being what NC State. What happens to Arizona and Arizona State? What happens to Washington State,
Iowa
Oregon
State?
Those are all things that could happen to NC State. Now, one of my favorite quotes that is attributed to Winston Churchill is that success is never final and failure is never fatal. And I think what people overreact to is, oh my God, if the Pac-12 is going to die, Arizona's not going to fold their athletic department. Right. If North Carolina joins the Big Ten and Clemson joins the SEC, like NC State's still going to exist. And that's the part of it that I have tried to get people to understand. You mentioned West Virginia. I don't know how many of you guys went to the game at West Virginia a few years ago. I did. It was unbelievable.
It was great.
It was a great atmosphere. I don't know how many times you guys have been to Blacksburg, because State hasn't been there that many times, but unbelievable place to go see a game at night. Their fans care. West Virginia fans care. And I'm sure all of you have been to Greenville. Now, there's a lot of State fans at games at Greenville, but you know what? Their fans care. They're passionate. Yeah. So what I would say is, in this post-apocalyptic world, I actually would advance the theory that NC State would have a better football schedule in that world, because even if Carolina goes and leaves NC State, that the state legislature is going to make Carolina and State play football every year anyway. So to me, I would rather be in a whatever the football schedule is, if you can make it work financially, which NC State fans have already shown they have the ability to do that. That's the part of it. I think you were joking about the Big Game Boomer thing. Ovius was trying to say Big Game Boomer was a parody account. That's all. And the guy came on our show and said he's not. And I have respect for that guy all the way.
Yes.
It is. I mean, but he put in tiers that NC State's above Georgia. Leighton, come on,
Yeah.
buddy. You can have NC State underwear on right now, but you don't possibly think that NC State has a better football program than Georgia. No,
I drink the Kool-Aid, Joe. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but they're not better than Georgia. I mean, I think NC State has a legitimate chance to play in the playoff this year. Absolutely. But there is no planet where NC State has a better football program than Georgia. Not one.
So going on that.
That being said,
go ahead.
That being said, I think we get into this situation where we think, failure is fatal. It's not. The sun comes up. The baseball program, the sun comes up. You'll have another chance at it. And, someone who was always going to work on that is Elliot Avent. You look at that guy and what he's been through. And every year he comes back and he'll find better players. And you'll be like, how did you do that? And he just does. And that's kind of, and to me, that's always been a trademark of NC State. You're never going to have the fanciest stadium. You're never going to have the highest rated recruits, and people will doubt you, but you can still find a way.
So you just brought up, you think that State can compete for a potential spot in the CFP this year. And,
I do.
And all models are showing currently, depending on who you take stock in, that State is potentially looking outside in on the expansion for these different leagues. If for some reason State and the football gods look down on us for one time since 1979, and we pull off the second greatest miracle since 1983, do you think then there's potentially a spot at the table? And there's a lot of what ifs there.
Sure. I think all football success is going to help NC State. I think some of the politics could help NC State. Boo Corrigan is the head of the college football playoff committee this year. Boo Corrigan is connected in the world of college sports. Those are all good things. I think if the SEC, honestly, if the SEC wanted NC State to play in a football only capacity in a reduced payout, I think NC State should do that. But I don't know why all of these conferences aren't going to a football only setup. That's the part that's ultimately confusing to me.
Right.
If you don't care about these other sports, which you don't,
correct,
and now you're going to spend a bunch of money to send USC's volleyball team to Ames, Iowa, or Des Moines, Iowa City. I don't even remember which part of Iowa they're in. I think it's Iowa City.
It's Iowa City,
before the three Hawkeyes get mad at me. It's like, why are you doing all that? It doesn't make any sense. And what's crazy to me is the pandemic. During the pandemic year, there were no fans in the stands. The ACC brought home a record revenue in media rights, in part because Notre Dame was a full-time member. But what also happened that year in the pandemic was there were all ACC games, and there was a different schedule. And that's why you're seeing that schedule model now, because that's what TV wants. And why are we expanding? Why is the Big Ten expanding? Like, do you really think Kevin Warren lied to Jim Phillips' face? I don't. But I do think Fox went to the Kevin Warren and said, hey, if you add these two LA schools, we will do this financially for you, which is apparently $1 billion per year.
It's insane.
Yeah, it's a lot of freaking money.
Crazy.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. Before we continue, I want to take a quick second to tell you about our sponsor, Flightland's Jessup Insurance Group, that has your whole world covered, with agents in 5 offices throughout Eastern North Carolina to help you decide how much coverage you need, offering policies for home and auto, recreational vehicles, commercial, crop, health, life, and employee benefits. They are able to combine options to find a comprehensive solution that works for you. Flightland's Jessup protects the things you love so you can spend less time worrying and more time enjoying them. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Flightland's Jessup. You can also visit their webpage at www.flightlandsjessup.com. So please make sure to go and check them out.
So what does the ACC need to do to, I don't know if survive is the right word, because as of now, there's really been no movement with any of the teams. Do they need to add Notre Dame as a full-time member? Do they need to add any other schools? Or do they just need to prevent the existing schools from leaving?
Yeah, I think they need to make sure that the grant of rights holds up in a court of law. Mm-hmm. I think that's their first focus. And I do think they are in a situation where they have to survive. But I also think it's funny. I can tell stories now of some things that former ADs say to me, and Debbie Yao is one of them. And I remember one of her first, I think it was her second year back at State. I don't know if it was. I think it was Greg Doyle who had compared NC State. Guys, you'll have to help me out. You're young. The Kardashians.
I'm not that young, Joe.
Kim is the famous one.
You got Chloe and
Kim, Courtney, Chloe.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, whatever.
Courtney's like the pretty
Courtney,
one.
Chloe.
And then Chloe was the one with Lamar Odom, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so Greg Doyle made an analogy to, hey, NC State in the triangle is Khloe Kardashian. And I remember Debbie either tweeting to him or texting him and saying, you need to be careful now. Khloe looks pretty good lately. So
She's the best.
The point here being, okay, even if Khloe's the third Kardashian, she's still a Kardashian, right?
Right.
And even if the ACC is the third best conference, you're still one of the best conferences. And the playoff deal, to answer your question, Michael, it's you got to get the playoff deal back on the table.
Right.
Once you get that guaranteed spot, now all of a sudden you're going, okay, Clemson, you want to go to the SEC? Oh, okay, cool. How do you think you're going to get in? Isn't it going to be, even in a 12-team field, aren't you going to have a lot easier time getting in as the ACC champion than
It's a good
8-4 in the SEC, which potentially is a reality with Texas and Oklahoma being in there? So, that the access is the way. That it would be increased money, too, from the college football playoff payout. Do you have to sit there? Am I allowed to curse on this programming?
Mildly.
Preferably not, no.
Okay. I mean, do you have to sit there and eat a crap sandwich while the SEC
there we go.
Big Ten make 50% more than you do? Yeah. I mean, that's kind of part of being a number 3. But it's better than not being at all.
But you
and
also
that's
fix
where I think the ACC has to go.
And you also fix that by Virginia Tech getting back to national prominence. You get Miami back. You get those schools back, FSU back.
Yeah.
Then you can ask for more. But until that happens, it's you can't really have an argument. My next question, I guess, would be: I'm seeing some stuff.
Listen, you guys do a podcast and you don't swear?
YouTube.
Are there rules?
YouTube, they're somewhat. We're just trying not to test the rules. Let's put it that way, Joe. We're just trying to be better safe than sorry.
I
That's
know
all. You know
when
what I mean?
Glennon swore on my Russell Wilson podcast, we just had to throw you have to put the rating on there, I guess. But
by the way, that was an excellent podcast. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was solid.
Mikey's episode in particular was just through the roof. It was great.
But
I remember that
where
one.
I was going to go with my question is: do you think that like the profit or the performance enhanced profits, for the teams that do better, does that move the needle at all for the ACC? Like, so you reward your teams that are, continuously excelling in the sport of football. I mean, does that do anything?
Potentially. The Big 12 tried that though with Texas, and
Not so much.
listen, I'm all for Clemson's already going to get what they're going to get by being Clemson, right? So there's a little bit of you remember the NFL when Jerry Jones bought the Cowboys, like he didn't really understand, like, I'm not selling ads for you. The league at the time had a deal with Coca-Cola.
Right.
And he's like, I don't care. I'm going to sell a deal with Pepsi. So there's a little bit of like, you should give autonomy to Clemson, North Carolina, and any of the schools to go make the deals that they can make. I think that's totally fair. But I also think the second you start going, hey, Clemson, you're really important in football. You're driving the bus. We're going to do this, and this for you. That's when you get yourself into a Texas Big 12 situation, and you realize it's untenable. To your point, if you could get your better brands, Miami and Virginia Tech, holy smokes, if you could get them back to a level of where they're annually contending in the top 10, then Miami's been the biggest disappointment of expansion, and it's not even close. Like it's not even of all of these additions and subtractions since in the last 20 years. Miami's had one double-digit win season since joining the ACC. One. They had
That's crazy.
They had like 9 in a row before they joined. Like it was nuts.
Right.
What they were before they joined and what they are now it's a travesty. So Dan Radakovich going down there, That's a great sign for them. Mario Cristobal and the money that they're spending to go him, that's a great sign for them.
Yeah.
It's too late to help NC State or the ACC now, though. I think that they needed to be performing at that level when the previous deal was done in 13 and in 14. Now it's more of you guys are just, you need to get your act together. I don't know why I want to swear so much tonight, but
I hear you, Joe. Yeah, no, and again, it's like, because one of the things too, because obviously my head is hugely around West Virginia, just like you said, I went to the West Virginia game back in 2019,
great environment.
And one of the things I love is their rivalry with Pitt, because I mean that's another thing that bring West Virginia AC would do, is you would have an annual West Virginia versus Pitt rivalry game, which, I mean, anybody who doesn't know the history and the amazingness of that rivalry will learn very quickly the amazingness of that rivalry.
Our band got a standing ovation.
And so, yeah, exactly. By playing,
Sweet Caroline.
Sweet Caroline. And also too, because I mean, they're competitive in basketball just as much as they are in football. So I mean, it's not like you're bringing somebody that's a dud on the basketball side, which I mean, obviously ACC cares a ton about. I mean, they could be definitely competitive in basketball as well. So I mean, it just comes down to really for West Virginia is that ACC, when we talked again last year, is probably one of the lowest averages in terms of active alumni, just because we have so many private schools. And I mean, like Wake Forest, I always say, has 4,500 active students total at one time, 4,500 students, while Ohio State, will have 100,000, like something like that. So again, it's just, you just don't have the money coming in that those other guys have, just because you don't have the amount of people. And then obviously West Virginia, again, this isn't a knack on them whatsoever, but just, for the most part, they're not the most wealthiest usually alumni for the most part, so it's an interesting dilemma for sure. But again, it just comes back to, again, that, I mean, I look at the Big 12 talking about being in conversations, adding 6 Pac-12 teams. And I mean, it's just a mind explosion right now that, again, I mean, we're literally in a point right now where it could change the future history of college sports. I mean, we're literally in that moment right now that could, change college sports forever. So that's pretty much where my head is at. But yeah, Joe. So I mean, do you have any kind of well, here, let me ask this question instead to kind of wrap things up here for this part. But do you think that the fact that John Swofford was on his retirement parade right when the original deal with Texas and Oklahoma started happening, do you think that was kind of a unfortunate that happened while this was happening kind of deal? Because I think that kind of, let's be real again, because I think that if you would have had somebody that is going to be there, they would have saw that and maybe would have acted, or maybe you've done something a little bit different than just basically just stand still.
I think this is a classic case of bad timing, because in
that's what I'm thinking.
Big 12 grant of rights expires, I believe, in 24. I believe.
Sounds about right, because I know they've got a new one coming.
Yes, that sounds right.
And they signed it, I believe, right around the time when the ACC expanded last time, 12 or 13.
Yep.
Right.
The ACC tried in 12 to add Texas and Oklahoma, but they were in a similar situation to what the ACC is in now, where you have 12 years left on a media deal and you're going, I can't get out of that.
Right.
So now, where Greg Sankey was smart, to your question, was he realized, okay, your deal's coming up. We can get you out of your deal. This is what ESPN is telling us you're worth to us. Is it worth it to you? And then they probably asked, hey, that's cool. Texas is the richest school in the country, so they weren't exactly motivated by money.
Right.
Money.
But you best believe Texas and Texas A&M, Texas is Carolina, Texas A&M is State.
Yep.
Texas A&M's done pretty well for itself in the SEC.
I would take those results.
To the point where Texas is probably like, no, wait a second. You imagine State went out on its own and Carolina would be like, but you need us. Where'd you go? So I think a
No.
lot of Texas's motivation for joining the SEC is, again, I want to swear, really, Texas A&M, you think you can just do that? Well, pound salt.
Watch what we can do.
Watch us. Yeah.
Hold my
And
beer.
I think that would be
Yeah.
75% of Texas's motivation, given what we know financially about Texas, and they have either the largest budget or the second to Ohio State's. It's one of the two. So to me,
Absolutely.
the move that Sankey made was smart, and it was also appealing
It
to
was.
Texas for that reason, because you're sticking it back to Texas A&M. Oklahoma, you're probably looking at it going, hey, if you let us in, what else can you do for us? And that's where the playoff expansion comes in, because hey, listen, we're going to make it 12 teams. We're probably going to get at minimum 4 SEC teams into a 12-team field. Minimum. I mean, there could be years where they get 6.
Yeah.
So you're going Oklahoma. You're going.
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
we could go 9-3 and get in. And I don't disagree with that.
Nope.
But I think that was a big part of it. And I think if you're the ACC, what are you really offering? You're not on that committee, so you're not privy to that information. You know already financially that you can't compete with the SEC. And also, let's be clear here. As I mentioned, it's the ESPN network conference. The ESPN cares about the SEC. The ACC is a second-class citizen to ESPN.
Yep.
No way around that. There's not a single way around that.
Yep.
And I've always argued that they should have leveraged NBC with Notre Dame. They could have held a little bit tighter, because you see now where Amazon is. I mean, I'm not saying you could have predicted that in 13.
Right.
Sure.
But I think it's just a case of bad timing.
Yeah.
I know they talked to Texas and Oklahoma in 12. I know they did. A very good source on that one. I just know, but that at that time it was very similar to where an ACC team is right now. Now, how motivated would a Texas or an Oklahoma be to get out of their grant of rights back in 12? That's where I'm getting at. Now you would see even Clemson, who people think is just kind of ticketed for the SEC and all this. Like you talk about a relationship between schools, like there is no love lost between Clemson and South Carolina.
Probably even Georgia, too.
That's the other way.
No.
That's the other way, too. Like South Carolina is very protective of what they have. They have, listen, you might have relatives who like South Carolina or, whatever. South Carolina has nothing. They have nothing. They have Ray Tanner. They had to go steal NC State's baseball coach to win something. They've never won anything ever else. Yeah. And they had Steve Spurrier and Lou Holtz.
And they had George Rogers. He got a Heisman.
Yeah. Right. 40 years ago. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't even think he deserved the Heisman that year, to be perfectly honest with you.
They got Don.
They have an 80,000 seat stadium, and they are in the SEC. That's what they have. Yeah. They don't win the SEC ever in basketball or football. They have an excellent women's basketball program. I apologize. They do have one thing. They have a great baseball. Well, they had a great baseball program. I don't think they've been as good since Ray retired. But what I'm getting at here is, like, I wouldn't count on South Carolina rolling out the welcome mat for Clemson. No, the Big Ten might. No, don't get me wrong, but I wouldn't count on South Carolina. And now, could South Carolina is ESPN going to listen to South Carolina? No. So again, your thinking needs to be: what does ESPN want? What does Fox want? That's what the world wants.
Along those lines,
though, college sports.
Isn't it in ESPN's interest to kind of help the ACC with the ACC network, or is it just that it's peanuts compared to the SEC? So they really don't care as much about it.
All right, guys. We're at the pause right there. All right, Michael, hold on to that question, all right? Because at some point we got to end part one.
I got a good question,
start part two, man. Otherwise, it's going to be 2 40-minute episodes. I know. So we're just going to pause right there. Go ahead, and so again, y'all, thank you all so much again for tuning in. Yes, make sure again to check in for part 2 here as Joe Giglio joins us back here after he gets his water, and we continue on with this conversation, talk NC State football and talk NC State basketball as well, and all those things. So thank you all so much again. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out whenever we release any new NC State content. Give this video a like so YouTube will put this video in front of more NC State fans. Give us a follow, Tuffy Talk now on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you all so much. We'll see y'all for part 2. As always, go back, baby.